Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today it's all about the money. We're going to be looking at a global economy with different types of interest rates going up and down, and markets growing and shrinking, and stress and crisis, and all sorts of different things. We're talking about Incorporated. This is an economic game for 2 to 4 players from TCA Games. It takes about 45 minutes per player to play. Today we're going to do a rule school, so I'm going to teach you how to set up the game and play it rule for rule so that you don't have to go through the rule book. Now, we're going to give you a 1-minute overview, and then I'm going to teach you how to play the game, setting up first, and then we'll see you on the other side for some final thoughts. Incorporated is a game for 2 to 4 players about global economy. You'll be buying different investments from different countries around the world publicly and selling them to each other privately. You'll be competing in different countries and being able to knock people off of certain spots, even moving to different countries where later you'll be able to knock them off for certain spots. Different events are going to change how the game's played every round. You'll be dealing with the balance of power between NATO and the SCO. You'll be dealing with global growth going up and down in percentages. You'll also be dealing with interest rates, which will tell you how much bonds or loans will cost to either take out or to pay back. And you'll be dealing with stress, which may cause crisis. You'll be lobbying different spots to try to affect the game in different ways, and then you'll also be earning earnings because cash is king in this game. You'll place the board in the middle of the table and you'll begin setting up these markers. The stress level will get set at 1. The balance of power will be at +3 in the blue for NATO. The global growth will start at 2%. And the interest rates will start at $20. The R&D marker starts attached to the energy industry of the United States. Shuffle the entire Outlook deck and draw 4 cards off of this shuffled deck and put those 4 cards on the Outlook space on the board. The rest of the Outlook cards will get placed into the box without looking at them. You won't need them this game. Since you'll start the game in phase 1, the Outlook phase, you'll take the last remaining black pawn and you'll place it in the Outlook phase. You will shuffle all 25 of the payoff cards and place them in the payoff spot on the bottom right of the board. You'll then place 3 black cubes in the bottom 3 industries in India and the bottom 2 industries of China. These industries are locked at the beginning of the game. Separate out all the money into different stacks and the corporate bonds and place them to the side of the board. Also separate out all the investment stacks for the different countries and place them to the side of the board. Players will randomly be assigned one of the 4 corporations, assuming you're playing with 4 players. For example, the Old Money Corporation is only played with 4 players, and everyone gets a box with their cubes and their executives. And for instance, this player actually gets 3 executives instead of everyone getting 2 in a 4-player game. Now, when getting a corporation, you look at the amount of players you're playing with. In this case, this corporation can be played with 2, 3, or 4 players. If you're playing a 4-player game, you'll start with 20 billion in cash. It'll tell you which position you are. I'm always first player if I'm green. Everyone will always get investment cards. This one says investments, United States, China, and Brazil. So you'll get each one of those investment cards. It then says assets. You'll take tech in the United States, mining in China, and energy in Brazil. So you'll be placing cubes of yours on the board. So for instance, they did have energy in Brazil. They put their color cube there, and the same thing for the tech in the United States and China mining. Now the game comes with a whole box of these different industry chips, and anytime you place a cube on the board, like in this case it was energy, you would take one of these in front of you. Just help you quickly see how many of each industries you're in. It will also help a ton during the scoring phases of the game. They also would take their 2 executives in a 4-player game. In a 3-player game, everyone would get a 3rd executive, and in a 2-player game you'd get 4 executives. Of course, the special case is that the yellow Old Money Corporation gets 3 instead of 2 in a 4-player game, as already mentioned. And so, for example, this green player, the Fortress Derivatives, gets their 20 billion, they have their 2 executives, and they have 1 stock in US, China, and Brazil. And in this 4-player game, you can see the different cubes of the different corporations over the different starting spots for a 4-player game. The flow of the game will go through these 5 phases in this numbered order until the game ends. But let's first look at this Outlook phase, phase number 1. We're going to draw an Outlook card, then draw the payout cards. So the Big Brother Corporation, which is the red corporation, will draw this card and be able to take the options that are on this card. Also has a special ability that Big Brother Corporation can always look at the top card in this deck. So for example, this card is Asia Infrastructure Bank. The first one says unlock a square in China or India. And again, that red Big Brother Corporation will be able to do that. And so they'd be able to look at any of these blocked ones, and let's say they say, you know what, let's undo this. We'll take the finance block off in China. In this case, the next things are global growth has a 4 growth, so it would go 1, 2, 3, 4. The interest rate has a 3 going to the right, so it would go 1, 2, 3. And stress would go down 2, 1, 2. The next one says a minor country with a 5 stability affiliated with NATO changes its affiliation to the SCO. So here's a NATO with a 5 affiliation. Maybe they change this to SCO by putting that token on it. And the final one is the SCO gains 1 power. So on the balance of power, we would move it 1 towards SCO. If it's already at the edge all the way and it can't go anymore, it simply just stays where it is. This Outlook card, once everything is done, would then be completely removed from the game. We would then draw as many payoff cards as in the global growth market shows. In this case, the pawn was here, and it's 9 payoff cards. So you draw those 9 cards from the top of the payoff deck, and you would separate them out by industry type. So after the 9 are drawn, we see 3 mining, 3 finance, 1 heavy, 1 tech, and 1 energy. Now these cards determine the industry squares that are going to be profitable at the end of the turn, so players are better off trying to occupy the highly profitable industries this turn. Phase 1's now over, so we go to Phase 2, which is the investment phase, where you'll be buying and selling on global stock markets. Then we'll be going in turn order, keeping in mind that turn order never changes from round to round or from game to game and is always decided by the position of your corporation. In this round, you'll be taking your executives and you'll be doing one of 3 things. You'll either be bidding in public markets, you'll be privately selling shares, or you'll be passing. Let's look at each of these. Now to make a bid in a public market, you put your executive in one of the major countries. A major country is one of the ones that has the stock that's available for it, and you can only do this for a country that has some stock remaining. So you can start the bid, you have to start it at a minimum of 3 billion, but you can start it as high as you want, higher than that. Things will go around auctioning until everyone is passed except one player. That player will spend the money into the bank and take one of these shares. You are allowed to bid more money than you actually have because you can take a loan. We'll talk about loans in just a minute, but let's just say that the green did end up winning this one. They can take their green cube and put it in any of the open industries that are on that country. However, let's say this is the way the board looked and it just won. If it's full, you can actually take one of your cubes and you can replace any of the other industry cubes that are there. So in this case, let's say you want to kick out the blue finance and place theirs there. After that share is bought, people will go around and try to possibly sell shares. Everyone except the player that just bought the share will go around, and at that starting bid that this was won at, they will start and go down. It'll be a reverse bidding, same as before. Once you pass her out, the lowest person that bids then gets to return a stock. Of course, they need to have one from that company, but they would return that stock to the stock portfolios off to the side of the board, and they would get the amount of money said, and then they would take off any one of theirs. So let's say red got it down to $7. They would get $7, they'd give their US stock away, and they would take either of their cubes off there. Now getting loans can get done in phases 2 or 3. When you take a loan, essentially it depends on the interest rates how much you're going to get. If it's here, you would get $17 in your hand from the bank and you'd get one of these corporate bonds. Let's say if it was over here, you'd only be getting $13. Now, if I already have a bond, for every bond I already have, if I was going to get another loan, I get 1 less for each bond. So if I already had one and I was taking a loan here, I would actually get 16 and I would get a second bond. At the end of the turn, we'll go over more detail about what you do getting bonds back. Essentially, you'd end up paying the current price plus 1 interest for each bond. So each of these would be $16 to pay back. Now once that green player has finished their first executive move in this phase, we would then go to the next player and so on and so forth. So let's talk about the other actions in this phase that you could possibly do. You could privately sell shares, which is you place one of your executives in the tax haven space, and you can point to a country that you have a share in, at least one, and you can say that you want to sell it to another player. So let's say the red player says, hey, I want to sell one of my China shares. They have 2 of them over here. And they start the bidding. They can set it anything they want. Let's say 15. If nobody wants to bid, meaning everyone passes, they just skip their action for that turn. It would go to the next player's turn. Red would be over. But let's say things go on, and let's say green wins the auction. Auctions are done just like I had mentioned earlier. So the green player would pay that money to red. Red would give them that stock. And the green player would place their choice, which one of the reds, if there's more than one, that they would want to replace with their own. So let's say maybe they say, you know what, I will take your finance. This would go back to the red player. The last possible action is you could just pass for your turn, which is placing one of your executives in the tax havens. This will continue until everyone is done with all of their executives, and then players will return their executives back to their pool and we'll go to the next phase. And we go on to the third phase where players compete to grab market share. Now in this phase, everyone's going to take 1 cube of their color for each of the shares that they own of each of the countries, and you're going to place a cube in that country for each share. So here you see players have added a cube for every share they own there, and we're going to go in normal turn order, and you can either fight, defend, expend, or pass. Let's talk about each of these. Fighting is you can do up to 2 attacks with cubes. An attack is defined by either grabbing an industry square by moving one of your asset cubes there, which would be like, hey, I can move this one here because it was empty, or you could kill another opponent's cube. Now green couldn't just go in here and take out one of these cubes because they have these, think of these as sort of defense. So the green could say take out this yellow cube like this, that would be a fight action. If he had another fight action, let's say he hadn't taken this, he could have used the fight action to take the yellow out and then use one of his actions to get into there. However, assuming I didn't take any actions yet, if red didn't have any defense, well of course I could just attack this red right out of there. You could also make an attack in one country and make your second attack in a different country. You could defend, so you could place one of your executives on a spot when you're trying to defend your space there. So if someone tried to come in here and take out red, they would first have to kill, of course, this and this. So they would essentially, the green could maybe say kill this one first, and then kill this, and then next turn, or some other way, they'd be able to come in here and try to get this. Now, if someone like this is killed, they will basically just go to the tax haven spot where they'll get it at the end of the turn. And keep in mind that the executive is just defense. It can't be used to attack anything. The next possible action is to expand. You could spend 1 billion to make up to 2 movements with your cubes. This could be 1 cube moving twice or 2 different cubes moving once. Now you'll see from this country this has a blue cube. You see this arrow. If the arrow is pointing to another country and it's the same affiliation, NATO here, you could do it. If one of these was the other NCO like this, you could not move it into to that camp. So I could move this over into here, or I could move it down into here. Also keep in mind, any cubes already in a spot cannot be moved. It's just the ones that were placed in the country. And notice when I did expand, I came here. You don't actually go into here. You have to use a fight action to do so. Also keep in mind, to spend that 1 billion to move up to 2 cubes, you can take a loan to do that. Then you could also pass by using all your remaining executives and just placing them in a defend spot. And this continues until everyone has to essentially pass, and then all the executives will be brought back, and any cubes that are in countries that weren't in actual industries will come back. Next, we'll move on to 4th phase, which is lobbying, where people will be sending their executives to some of these different spots, with most of these only being able to be taken by 1 executive. Let's talk about these. The first is power play, and these can get taken in 4 different regions with this bomb icon. 1, 2, 3, and 4 in America, Europe, Third World, and Asia. So let's say the green player decided to take a power play in lobbying to Asia, and he puts his executive there. Well, notice what side this China is on the NCO's side of things right now. And since this player went to Asia for the power play, you would look at the country that has the battleground signal, and this is this one, South Seas. Each of the regions that have the power play options have a battleground place. Now when battling in the South Seas, this player gets to decide to take a side, either NATO or the SCO. Now as you can see in the balance of power, NATO is up +3. They could choose either side, but let's say they pick NATO. You'd then take, in effect, any possible modifiers. This country does not have any, but if it was this one, you'd see you'd get a +1 towards SCO, which would have made NATO +2 in a sense. But since we're actually doing it here, NATO still has a +3. You would then roll this clash die, and depending on what this die is, different things would happen. If I rolled a 5, for example, NATO is going to be the +3, +5, which is 8, and then we compare this to the number on the country. If it at least equals that, then you have won this. This player then would have been able to put their cube in that market, and then they would take a battle marker and move it from this to this. Now, NATO had won this, so NATO, this would no longer be a battle country, it would be with NATO, and then they would take a battle marker and move it to one of the other countries. You then place it on any of the other minor countries. They don't have to be linked, but any of the other minor countries, so maybe they place the battle marker right here. Now, you can only choose one of the major countries, like China, if all the other minor countries are on the other side. Also keep in mind, when rolling this die, a 1 is always a fail and a 6 is always a win. Now, if I had not won this, then simply nothing would have happened. Now, if a major country in a region wins one of these clashes, simply put the battleground on any of the other minor countries in that area. Now, China and the United States are two special conditions because you never roll the clash die for them because they're just that strong, they always win. Now, if a major country loses a battle clash, a few things happen. All the asset cubes go away, they get put off the board into the player supply. The battle clash would go away and it would go to the other side, so essentially this would now be NATO, and any investment cards from this country go back to the bank and can be bought again later. You would then move the balance of power 1 away from the losing side. SEO lost this one, so it would move 1 towards NATO. Now keep in mind, moving this only happens when a major country switches sides, not a minor country. Now we're going to talk about tax havens in the lobbying phase, and this is the only other spot that you do not place your executive on when you actually go there. And when you're taking the tax havens here, you would place your executive and a cube in that spot. Now this action can be taken by the same player more than once in this round, or it can actually be taken by other players as well. Now keep in mind that these cubes you can't fight in the tax havens, but in the next competition phase, in the next round, people will be fighting for this. And keep in mind that the first player, since there's never any fighting in the tax havens, the first player that's able to actually lock this up will keep it for the game. Also notice that the tax havens has different rules for different phases of the game. If someone goes to the central banks, nobody else can now go here because their executive is there. That allows you to move either the interest rates or the stress 2 spots in either direction. So this could go here, or it could have gone here, or this could have gone here, or this would have just maxed out. One of those things would have happened. If someone chooses the budget, no one else can select it this round, and they can choose to do things with global growth. Now you have 2 choices when you select budget. One of them is called austerity. Here you can move global growth down 1, and you can get rid of any one of the revealed payoff cards for this round, and you could discard it. So let's just say they discard this finance card. Or if that wasn't what they chose, instead, if it was like this, they could increase global growth by 1, and then draw a payoff card, an additional one, from the deck. And if a player goes to R&D, no one else can go there this round, and they'll be able to influence that R&D token. And when you take that R&D action, you can move the R&D token on the board to any country that has a stability of 5 and place it on any industry in that country. So if it was the red player doing it, they'll move it from energy. So let's say the red player placed it in tech in China because they have a red cube there. Notice that China does have a stability of 5, so that's okay. This R&D token essentially counts this as 2 squares during the earnings phase and during the end game. Neither of those have we covered yet, but we will soon. Now let's say the yellow player goes to subsidies. Now these could have obviously been done in any order, but in this case, they have gone there. No one else can go in that spot if someone has gone there. And what that allows you to do is draw the top 3 cards from the payoff deck, and you can swap any one of these with anyone that was already out there of the payoff cards. So maybe we say, you know what, let's take finance out and put heavy in, and then these 3 cards would go to the discard pile. And lastly, we'll go to the earnings phase, where we'll check to see if there's a crisis and we'll earn money from payoffs. At the beginning of the earnings phase, we calculate the crisis difficulty. That takes the percentage of global growth, that's 6 here, and we would add or subtract to or from it depending on the stress. In this case, it's the 6% plus 2, so that's 8. If the stress was here, that would have been 6 minus 2, it would have been 4. But let's say it was here, we need 8. So if the blue player, who is the giant squid corporation, denoted by this blue die, would roll his 12-sided die. If this number is equal to or greater than that number that we just calculated, then we go to payoff as normal. If it is not, then we have a crisis, and then we go to payoff. Now, managing the crisis is also done by the blue corporation, Giant Squid. By the way, if there is no blue player playing this game, that means it's a two-player game, you just take the corporations and you would shuffle them and just randomly pick one to do so. Now, to do this, essentially, this player would then move the difference between the global crisis number and the die number. So again, here we have 6 plus 2 is 8. The difference between that is 6. So what's going to happen is both the global rate and the interest rates are going to go down by 6. So this is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it always hits there and won't go any further. They would also take 6 payoff cards out into the discard pile because, again, the difference was 6. So let's say they didn't have any mining, they didn't have any finance, so that's 5, and they weren't heavy in tech, but they were heavy in energy. Again, that's that blue player, the Giant Squid Corporation, doing this. And after that's finished, the stress goes back to 0. And then we go to a payoff. For each revealed payoff card at that spot, each industry square will generate 1 billion to its owner. So for example, since there were 3 heavy cards out, each of these heavies is going to be worth 1 billion. So this blue player in just these 2 countries is going to get 6 billion for that. Now remember, you've been using these industry chips to keep track of which cubes you have on the board, taking one when you place a cube and returning one in the supply if a cube of yours is removed. So when you get to the scoring phase, it's really easy. Just look in front of you, see how many you have of each industry. That'll make the scoring go by a lot smoother. They're also going to get another 3 billion for having heavy United States, and the yellow player is going to get 1 billion for having energy because there was 1 payoff card for it. Now for each of the industries that has at least 1 payoff card out, whoever has the most squares of each of these will get a 2 billion bonus. In a 2-player game, it's only a 1 billion bonus. Now if somebody was tied for heavy, nobody would win it. Either way, we would either give it or not if it was tied, and then these would get discarded and we would go to the next one to give out the additional bonus. At this point, everybody would pay their bond interest for each of the bonds. It's always 1 billion per bond. Now if you don't have enough money, you give everything you can and nothing bad happens because you just get bailed out. In this case, I would owe 2 billion. Now at this point, you can decide to pay back your bonds, and it depends on the interest rate. If you pay it now, it'd be 20 you'd have to pay back, so you probably don't want it now and do it now. If it was here, you'd only have to pay 11 to pay each of them back, and here it would be like 16. Now everyone does this simultaneously, decide if they're going to pay them back, except the red Big Brother Corporation. They can opt to decide after seeing all players' decisions because they know the top card of the Outlook deck for their special ability. Then you would start back at phase 1 again, going through the Outlook deck. Unless of course it's empty, that would trigger the end game because that means you've already played 4 full rounds. If it is the end of the game, we'll start with finance, and every player will get 5 billion for each of the cubes they have in a finance square. If somebody has the most, meaning more than everybody else, they'll get a bonus of 10 billion. Now that bonus is only 5 billion in a 2-player game. We then do that for all the other industries, and then each player would have to lose 20 billion for every unpaid bond they have. And then each player would have to pay 20 billion for each bond that they still have not paid back. Then everyone counts up their money. Whoever has the most is the winner. If there's a tie, nobody wins. It's a draw. Well, I hope this rule school helped you enjoy the game faster by getting it to the table, setting it up, and playing it quicker than it would have been if you had read the rules. Now, if you have any additional questions, go ahead and post them as comments to this video, and myself and TCA Games will do the best we can to answer them.